Hello, Howie Bentley here. Welcome to episode number 11 of Sword and Sorcery Heavy Metal. Today, Matthew Knight and I discuss the Bran Morn story, Worms of the Earth by Robert E. Howard. Check it out. Hey, Matt, how's it going?
Hey, Howie, doing good. How about you?
Awesome, man. Doing awesome.
Good.
So today we're going to be discussing Robert E. Howard's Bran Morn tale, Worms of the Earth, which I think is one of two of his best tales, being Worms of the Earth, and the other Bran Morn tale being Kings of the Night, which we'll probably do a separate video for that one. But, okay, so when this was published in 1932. It was November, I believe. Yeah, November of 1932 was when Worms of the Earth was first published. Now, Kings of the Night was published a couple years before, and I'm not going to talk, like I said, much about that one, but this was the second, really, I guess you would say, famous Bran Morn tale. And around this time, Howard was really firing on all cylinders, because the next month, after the November issue of Weird Tales in 1932, there was the next month's issue, of course, in December, was The Phoenix on the Sword, was the debut of Conan the Barbarian. And that was, The Phoenix on the Sword was the story was originally a King Cole tale called By This Axe I Rule. And Farnsworth Wright had rejected it. He wanted something with more supernatural elements in it, so Howard reworked it, slid Conan in there instead of Cole, went heavy on the supernatural elements, and ended up with The Phoenix on the Sword, which was published the month after this story. I probably didn't need to go into all that, but I'm just trying to explain here how Howard was at pretty much at his peak here, writing this kind of stuff. Worms of the Earth, The Phoenix on the Sword, two of the finest sword and sorcery tales ever written, in subsequent months there that were published. So anyway, the story, Worms of the Earth, deals with Bran Morn. Bran Morn is the king of the fictional king of the Picts at the height of Imperial Rome, around the time they built Hadrian's Wall, I believe. Rome did. So what's going on here is, just to go ahead and cut to the chase and talk about the story. Bran Morn is posing as an ambassador to a Pictish ambassador, and he is in a Roman settlement, and he sees one of his men being crucified right before his very eyes, and he can't react to it because he would give himself away, and he is the leader of these Pictish tribes or nations or whatever you want to call them, because he has brought these Pictish tribes together, which normally was, from what I understand, like herding cats was nearly an impossible thing to do. But he brought these tribes together to make a stand against Rome, along with the Celts, or I guess there were Celts by then, or maybe Gaels, Cormac na Connacht, who is very more prominent in Kings of the Night, that Irish character. But anyway, so he sees one of his men crucified right before him. Fortunately for his tribesman who is crucified, he spits in the face of one of the Roman soldiers, and he kills it and gives him a quick death. And then he's, of course, punished, jailed, or whatever for it. But still, he has to endure, being nailed to a cross and murdered by the Romans. So Bran Morn is trying to figure out how to exact vengeance on the Romans. And this idea just pops in his head. I don't think there's a lot of explanation as to why this just comes to him, but he's going to make a deal with these. They're like serpent, sort of a race that never evolved into being quite human, and they were driven back into the earth by the Picts at one point. And so he's going to make a deal with this subhuman race that lives under the ground to bring down this Roman settlement, and the Roman official who was responsible for murdering his man. So, do you want me to continue with this, or do you want to chime in and give us part of the synopsis too about the? Well, let me get to this part. I'll go ahead and do about the witch woman because I made a couple notes here. So he goes to this witch woman, and she's like a werewoman. And for anyone who's seen John Milius's Conan the Barbarian, you know, these scenes in Conan the Barbarian were lifted from a number of other Howard tales that were non-Conan tales. And an example here is when Conan meets the witch woman, takes the symbol with the two snakes facing each other and takes it to get information, and he has to sleep with this witch woman to do that. And Bran McMorn makes a similar deal because he wants to strike this bargain with these creatures, these serpent-like creatures that never evolved into men who live in the earth, and he needs to know how to make contact with them. So he goes to Atla, this werewoman who is obviously descended from the same race or whatever these creatures are that live on the earth that we refer to as worms of the earth, or Howard referred to as the worms of the earth. And so he agrees to bed her if she will help him strike the deal with the worms of the earth. And that's basically the gist of the story. We can get some more into it, and I'll turn it over to you in just a second, I promise. But one of the things with the witch woman is, like I said, she was more like a werewolf in the Conan movie, but in this Bran McMorn tale, she's more like a serpent woman or descended from these people. So another thing, and I'll just bring you in right here. What is your opinion as far as these heroes, these sword and sorcery heroes? Now, Cain did it too. Cain would sleep with some really strange female creatures. And can you think of any other instances where the hero does this to gain an advantage, where he is, basically rutting with a subhuman thing, like a monster type thing? Or is Howard the first that historically that you can remember reading this type of situation from?
Yeah, I think he probably is the first. If I think about that, I know Michael Moorcock had Elric having a lot of strange relations with various female characters in strange settings, but I can't think of any specific instance. And part of it, I think, with Howard is the fact that he has so many of these races going on. And I think the deal with that and the deal with the worms of the earth, it's not really defined what exactly they are. But if you look at his timeline and the various explanations he's given over the years, or not over the years, but back then, in the times he was putting that stuff out, it seemed that the idea was that civilization had devolved from Atlantis with Cole, and then this kind of new evolution process began. And it's like the Sumerians evolved from the race they used to be, the Atlanteans or whatever, but there's a lot of these races that didn't make it in the evolution process, and they stayed this kind of subhuman, in this subhuman form. And that's what I believe these worms of the earth probably are. They're like this reptilian race kind of thing, serpent people that didn't quite evolve. So because he has this concept going on, yeah, the intermingling with these different, and it's not really, it's not extremely common that this stuff is mentioned, but the Bran McMorn stories, I think, especially because there's a lot of different nationalities happening. I mean, he talks about Bran being of the ancient race of Picts. You know, he's not the race, you know, because you talk about him bringing all these different Pictish lineages together. They talk about how the other Pictish races are like, you know, inbred with the Celts and like Teutonic lineages and all these different things. So Bran being of the pure lineage of the ancient Picts, yeah, for him to have to make a deal like this with these kind of, you know, not quite human, you know, entities. It's yeah, it's interesting concept. I was thinking about when I was reading this story, it's funny because I read this a lot of times, but every time I do, and every time I reread one of these stories with you, I always pick up on different things that I hadn't thought of before, and especially because of our conversation. So we were talking about Hellsguard, the Jarell of Joiry story last time, or time before. I think we did Sojourn last time, but it struck me the Worms of the Earth is quite a similar scenario to probably more like Black God's Kiss, where you have this hero who is after a supernatural instrument of vengeance to get out of a situation. And that's similar to what's going on in a lot of those C.L. Moore tales. And I feel like with Howard, it's a lot, you know, there's in the other stories, there's a lot more hacking heads off and things like that. And this particular story, it reads more like that. Another thing I thought about was we talked about how in C.L. Moore's stories, the kiss is always a symbolic thing. And in Black God's Kiss and other ones, there's always this thing with the kiss, and that's what you have going on here with, although, you know, he's sleeping with her, but it's, I think often in the Jarell tales, more is implied too. So it's just a similarity that I thought of as I was reading this time.
Yeah, that's a good observation there. And of course, they refer to it as a kiss because, and Atla does too, because these are 1930s here that we're talking about. You know? So, and another thing now, the Lovecraftian elements are almost immediate in this story because Bran swears by the black gods of Alye and also the Nameless Ones whenever he. So maybe, I don't know if Howard was maybe giving us a hint that that's how this idea came into Bran McMorn's head, is because he had sworn by these cosmic, like these great old ones that H.P. Lovecraft wrote about in his fiction. And this sort of brought them, invoked their presence into the situation, is when he swears by those. But those were straight out of Lovecraft mythos. And of course, H.P. Lovecraft influenced all those guys back then. Everybody who's writing for Weird Tales was in, I mean, name writers, maybe not Seabury Quinn, but, you know, the Howard, even Clark Ashton Smith, everybody good was influenced by Lovecraft back then. And so there's definitely a prominent Lovecraft influence. And also, Arthur Machen, which Arthur Machen had influenced Lovecraft as well as Howard. But there's Arthur Machen, the novel The Black Seal and The Red Right Hand. They both concern these strange subterranean beings and that sort of intersect with these old folk tales about fairies or these little people in the British Isles. And it's not just the British Isles. Apparently, it was all over Europe. Because I was talking to Marco Concorreggi. You had him on the podcast a while back, but he and I were talking the other day, and I believe it was Marco, and he was mentioning that his grandmother there in Italy, I think it was his grandmother's, one of his grandparents, was telling him about these people seeing these little people in fields and that sort of thing when they were growing up. These strange, I'm assuming, subterranean beings, like Machen refers to. Howard and Lovecraft sort of built on, especially Howard with Worms of the Earth. Trying to reel it back in here to what we're talking about, but Worms of the Earth, these strange small people who live in the earth.
Right, and they always bring up, discovering these small little stairways that are meant for like small people in these subterranean places and things like that. Yeah, it's pretty wild, but yeah, excellent concept for a story. I think this has always been one of my very favorites. I've always been really fond of Bran McMorn in general. Another thing I thought of, again, comparing it to our earlier conversations, when we were reading Solomon Kane, which I think it's a good point that you mentioned, that during the time this one was written, Howard was, really had it going on and was very popular, because we were talking about Solomon Kane before, and that was like, a different time. So, getting back to what I'm saying, when we were talking about Solomon Kane, we were talking about the character of Enlonga and how he's this, wizard who assists the hero. And you had asked me if I could recollect any other characters in Howard's fiction that were like that, and I said no. But in fact, when I was reading this again, this Gonar character, he appears in, I believe, this story and Kings of the Night.
Mm-hmm.
He comes to Bran McMorn via dream magic.
In a dream, exactly. Yeah.
Happens with Enlonga and Solomon Kane. And it's almost like, and I don't know that Howard did this, I think he just had a lot of similar characters, but it's almost like how Michael Moorcock often has like these separate incarnations of the same character through, because he's got that multiverse thing going on. But it almost feels that way with this Gonar character and like that Enlonga character. That was another similarity that I picked up on that I hadn't thought about before.
Yeah, good observation there. The Worms of the Earth, now we don't see those, or we only get a glimpse toward the end of the story. It reminds me when I was a kid, and we used to have this chiller theater thing that came on, or chiller or thriller or something like that, came on Saturday night. And they had these old monster movies and science fiction movies. And it was just a struggle to stay up that late, because when you're a kid, you fall asleep earlier because you're used to getting up and going to school early and all that. So anyway, we would have to wait to the end of the movie to see the monster, and that was like a big thing. It was a big good time on a Saturday night. You wait to the end of that movie to see that monster, but they wouldn't show it throughout the movie, and I think that was partially because of maybe some of the writers who had influenced some of the screenwriters at the time, maybe like Lovecraft. It's like what you don't show. But also it was because I think they knew that their ability with effects at the time were pretty poor. So they had to do the best they could in just a few shots and make it a big deal, this climax at the ending. So, but you do see a little bit of the worms at the end, but for the most part, Howard keeps them hidden. He keeps you using your imagination as to what these things actually look like.
Yeah, and the brief description that he does give when one is described real briefly, like you say, it is it's hard to. I mean, you can envision it, but it doesn't really paint the picture. So again, you're kind of in between. Are these serpent humanoid things, or are they more human-like? And he talks about them having these serpent fangs and these blubbery lips and like looking reptilian-like, but at the same time, they're described as this ancient race that, is more human. So it's hard to really say. Yeah, he keeps it kind of a mystery.
Mm-hmm. One of the things too, I think, and about Bran McMorn is, okay, so Imperial Rome is pretty much, they were like the original globalists. All roads led to Rome. It's like this center of power.
Yeah.
And, you have these different depictions of this. For example, in Orwell's 1984, when Winston Smith is being, brought down by Big Brother, as they refer to it, they're destroying him basically mentally. And he said, I'm paraphrasing here, but I'll just describe what he was saying, is he is telling them that they're eventually going to be brought down too. Big Brother will, and they say, well, by who's going to do it? I mean, who do you think is going to do this? God? And by this time, nobody believes in God. They're all atheists. So he said, no, the spirit of man. So I look at Bran Morn as the spirit of man. He's that one force that's going to push back against this thing that is seemingly so mighty and such a centralized power that nothing can stop it. Rome's just a juggernaut. And Bran McMorn, the spirit of man, is going to push back against this with whatever means he has to. And of course, in this one, it's rather nefarious. We reach this cosmic horror type scenario with this. But any thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a good observation. Yeah, Bran McMorn has this sense of loyalty to his people, and it's often portrayed as like a burden. You know, he's gets in these situations where he feels that he has to go to great lengths because he comes from this barbarian, race of tribal folk who, are fighting with spears and things like that. And then you've got, Rome, who's like this mighty juggernaut. And yeah, he's always got to come up with an idea to outsmart them. And I think one thing we should mention too is he really has doubts about, well, actually he doesn't have doubts. He's pretty determined, but it's said throughout the story by both Gonar and Atla that this is a bad idea, disturbing these worms of the earth and bringing them in. I mean, there's just even though you want vengeance against Rome, there's some things you just don't mess with, and he's determined to do it. And that's the reason why. So it's really, really implied that this is a very powerful force that everybody's advising him not to mess with. And yeah, he's just really determined to do it. And I think it goes back to, again, that sense of loyalty he has to lead his people.
Yeah, I think that's a very good observation. And you mentioned earlier that he isn't like he's like his people, but different than his people, in that he's this pure strain of Pict. And you read about this in Kings of the Night, and that where he's talking about he's from the same lineage as Brule, the spear slayer,
yeah,
who was Cole's friend.
Right.
So that connects way back, but he's different than his tribesmen.
Yeah, right. And I think that also leads to what kind of comes across as his frustration sometimes, because he's kind of more advanced, and they really rely on him to get them out of all these situations. I think of Kings of the Night, with that whole awesome battle scene and everything, and he's got to come up with all these tactics and everything. It's like yeah, he's just completely, they're completely dependent on him. It's another similarity, not to keep comparing, and I've never thought of this before, but to Jarell of Joyery. She's got the same thing going on, where she's leading this, French military and got to get them out of situations. Which I think when those kind of plots are incorporated in this stuff, it gives them a real purpose, and it's more than just a kind of adventure, because it's more, there's more at stake than just one man's kind of thing. I mean, we think about sword and sorcery, and it's like, it differs from high fantasy because it's guys, doing their own thing and not out to save the world. But characters like Bran McMorn, they really do have a lot at stake, and it makes the stories, it adds even more depth to them, I think.
Yeah, definitely. He has a sense of purpose that characters like Conan and some of the others, the sellsword types, don't have.
Right.
He has a responsibility. But And there was a roundtable sword and sorcery discussion, and I posted it on the on this channel. Last episode, there was roundtable sword and sorcery discussion with me and Jason Tarpey from Eternal Champion, and Deathmaster from Doomsword, and Justin Young from Monsters, Madness, and Magic hosted that, and we were discussing this. The topic of Bran McMorn came up, and I was saying that I was the first to write a story a song about Bran McMorn. Actually, I wrote two, and originally recorded it on And On Shall Fall. Recorded it in 2001. It was released in 2002, and we re-recorded it. Of course, I'm telling this for the viewers, not you. You've been a part of this, because on Legacy of Atlantean Kings, you were the vocalist on that when we re-recorded these songs, and two of the songs were about Bran McMorn. There was Fighter of the Blackstone, which refers to Worms of the Earth, and there was And Rome Shall Fall, which refers to Kings of the Night. So I was the first heavy metal musician to write a song about Bran McMorn. But the year later, I don't know if you know about this or not, but a year later, an Italian band released an album called Worms of the Earth. The name of the band is Rose Crucis, I think. And they released that concept album. I think it came up because we were talking about, Jason Tarpey, that is, said he had written a song about Bran McMorn too, just titled Worms of the Earth, on, I don't know if it was their newest album or a few albums back or whatever. But anyway, so I just thought I'd throw that out there. It was these stories really made an impression on me, and I mean, reading it again, I understand why it was just as strong, I think. Now, I originally read this probably 95. It was probably 94 or 95 when I read these Bran McMorn stories, and of course there's and I listed this on one of the videos. There's a book called The Last King, Bran McMorn, The Last King. It's a Del Rey collection. And the Del Rey collections are ideal if you're going to get Howard collections. But I think I have just about every Bran McMorn edition that was published or close to. But those are the two stories that are really big. Now, other than that, the only stuff I know about Bran McMorn, there never was a Bran McMorn novel that Howard wrote, but there were two Bran McMorn novels, one by Carl Edward Wagner, Legion from the Shadows, I believe was the title of it. I'm a huge fan of Carl Edward Wagner. Anybody who's watched some of the other videos would know that, but to me, that novel just fell flat. Bran spends more time getting his ass kicked than doing anything in that novel. Have you read it?
I believe I have it, and I think I read it. I get those confused sometimes, like that one, and then there's two Bran McMorn novels, right? There's another one by
Richard L. Tierney and David C. Smith. It's called For the Witch of the Mists.
Yeah. And I want to say that I liked that one better, For the Witch of the Mist, and I started to reread that one a few years back just for the hell of it, and did somehow abandon it. But I think the thing with those are the Howard stories are so good, and they have that Howard spirit in them. And these guys, of course, harness that energy. I mean, they're masterful writers, the guys you're talking about, but there's just something that, and I mean, I feel the same way about, the stories Lynn Carter wrote and Sprague de Camp and all that. They're cool, and I enjoy them. And when I, back in the day before, now they have these great collections, we used to get those paperbacks with the Frazetta covers, and you'd have to read through, those stories, and then the Howard material were in between, and you'd have to, read them all together, and it was like kind of confusing, really. But yeah, I think that there's just something about the pure Howard text that is just magical. And yeah, I don't remember those novels being as good. There are some Bran McMorn tales that I think are kind of underrated. I think that The Dark Man, that one is that's a very dark sword and sorcery tale, and I think it has one of the most brutal, violent scenes in it of anything I've ever read before. I have it in my book. I have it all like highlighted and stuff. But that's a real good one. And
now there's one where he's off stage. Is that the one? I'm trying to remember. It's been like I said, probably 95 since I read all of the Bran Morn stories. But there's one of them? Isn't Turtle O'Brien in one of those Bran Morn stories? And Bran is just referred to. He's just like a totem or a statue or something they refer to in one of those stories, I think.
Yeah, that's right.
Which do you remember?
Because there's a lot, there's a lot of characters in that. There's a couple of stories. I mean, you got Cole and Cormac and all these other guys in Kings of the Night, and then like you say, O'Brien makes an appearance. I can't remember exactly which one's which.
Yeah.
Which one stick out to me, and yeah, they're all good, really good. I think the anthologies are pretty consistent too. Like the one I have is called Worms of the Earth, that classic cover. That one I think is the same stories as if you just get like the old Bran McMorn collection. And then now, like you say, they got that Del Rey one that I think might even have some additional stuff in it.
It does, yeah. Now, as far as novels, when I started saying a minute ago, I mean, like I said, the Carl Edward Wagner novel did not leave much of an impression on me, the Bran McMorn novel. But I did like Richard L. Tierney and David C. Smith's For the Witch of the Mist. So I would recommend anybody watching this, if you read these Bran McMorn stories and you want to read more, of course, it's not going to be Howard, but it's not going to be Bran McMorn like Howard wrote it. But For the Witch of the Mist was, I thought, a pretty solid novel. And I would recommend it. And then I would say take in what I said with a grain of salt if you like, but you could read for Legion of the Shadows by Carl Edward Wagner, but I wouldn't read it again.
Yeah.
So anyway, is there anything else that we needed to talk about while we're here today?
I don't think so. I'm sitting here trying to think of other things that I feel like I'm missing something. Like there's some other Bran McMorn thing that I'm remembering, but I'll have to ponder on that.
Okay. Well, we can always put it in the comments later when the video goes up. If you want to do that.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, not much more to say. Excellent sword and sorcery tale. One of the classics. Bran McMorn. I'd recommend reading them all. I mean, there's not that many of them, and they go on pretty. They move at a pretty fast pace. So I definitely pick up one of those anthologies and roll through them.
Mm-hmm. Good deal.
Yeah.
Well, as always, I appreciate you getting on here with me today and talking about Worms of the Earth. And this has been Matthew Knight and Howie Bentley for Sword and Sorcery Heavy Metal. Be sure to hit like and subscribe and leave us a comment. And we'll see you next episode.
I will change while my fists can still